So to be clear, if a patron says, I'm exempt, you have absolutely no right to demand to prove it, or show me a note, or tell me what your exemption is and the details of the exemption. I'm Rocco Galati. I'm the Executive Director of the Constitutional Rights Center. After our initial newsletter and YouTube on masking rights for the members of the public, a lot of independent business owners since then have emailed us and phoned us requesting that I do a brief video to outline generally the duties and the rights of a business owner vis-a-vis their patrons and their employees in the context of masking. So the masking laws across the country are either by municipal bylaw or provincial ordinance, and they more or less are consistent. But the first thing you need to do is dig up the masking bylaw that applies to you, either by the city or the province. Now, business owners are required to ensure that they convey and to in fact ensure that people who come into their premises are masked. However, that's only half the law. The other half of the law, which is equally of force, is that there are exceptions and exemptions to the requirement to mask when they come into your business location. Those exemptions include medical, whether they be physical or psychological, physical problems with putting on a mask, given physical disabilities, and any of the grounds under the Human Rights Code. There are religions and creeds that find it offensive to wear a mask when they're dealing with people. And so those exemptions are permissible as exemptions to the masking laws. You as a business patron are not allowed to say to your patron, prove it, show me medical note, what's your exemption? And you are not allowed to get the personal details of a person's medical or psychological details or get proof from a doctor to prove their exemption so they can frequent your establishment. That's generally barred by the various human rights codes in the provinces. Now, with respect to your employees, if an employee cites an exemption, depending on how you're structured, you have to respect it as well or accommodate that employee. So for instance, you may accommodate them and have them work in an area where they don't come into contact with anyone and they are able to socially distance if you're concerned. So the duty of you to accommodate and the right of the employee to be accommodated is set out by provincial human rights legislation, and that's based on various grounds: disability, creed, religion, conscious objection. All of that is set out in your provincial human rights code. So then after you determine which bylaw or provincial masking ordinance applies to you, you should also look at your human rights code in the province to see what the human rights basis of accommodation are in your province, and they tend to be pretty standard. Now, if you live in Ontario, and I'll use this as an example, but this is clearly the law in Ontario. On October 3rd, 2020, Ontario enacted Regulation 364/20/20 pursuant to the Reopening Ontario, a Flexible Response to COVID-19 Act of 2020 from the Ontario legislature. And this regulation is a regulation passed pursuant to that legislation. Section 2 Sub bracket 4 of that regulation deals with masking on a provincial level. So no matter where you are now in Ontario, this law applies, and in our opinion at the Constitutional Rights Centre, prevails over any municipal bylaw. And that is any municipal bylaw that contradicts or in any way violates this cabinet regulation from the provincial legislature is in violation of this regulation. The emergency was called pursuant to emergency legislation. These regulations are the masking requirements pursuant to that legislation. No employer is permitted to go fishing in some other act that has nothing to do with COVID and pretend to bypass this provincial ordinance under the guise of another act. And what in Ontario, what this provincial ordinance says under section 2 sub 4 is that the person responsible for the business shall ensure that every person in the indoor area of the premises is masked. However, there are exceptions enumerated under this subsection that include a child who's under 2 years old doesn't need to mask. Certain schools are exempted at certain ages. And there's a number of exemptions. And the ones I would like to highlight that really apply to business owners are: you're exempt if you have a medical condition that inhibits your ability to wear a mask or face covering, under sub G of subsection 4. Under H, if you're unable to put on or remove the mask or face covering without assistance of another person. I needs to temporarily remove their mask or face covering while in an indoor area to receive service that requires removal, engage in an athletic or fitness activity, to consume food or drink, or as may be necessary for the purpose of health and safety, if they need to remove their mask. You're also exempt if you're being accommodated in accordance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And this one is very important. 4K, you're exempted if you're being reasonably accommodated in accordance with the Human Rights Code. So read your Human Rights Code and what the reasonable accommodations are under the code, which include bases of accommodation above and beyond medical exemptions. And then with respect to your patrons. With respect to employees, there's a further exemption in that if one of your employees performs work for the business or organization in an area that is not accessible to members of the public and is able to maintain a physical distance of at least 2 meters from every other person, they're not required to mask. So if when your employee says, "Listen, I work over there. I'm never closer than 6 meters to anybody. I'm not serving the tables in the cafe." Let's say they're in the kitchen or something. They're not required to mask at all for any reason as your employee. So what's important under subsection 6 of section 2 of this provincial regulation, and I'll read it for you because it's very important. It drives home and codifies what the law was before anyway. It says, "For greater certainty, it is not necessary for a person to present evidence to the person responsible for a business or place that they are entitled to any of the exceptions set out in subsection 4. So to be clear, if a patron says, "I'm exempt," you have absolutely no right to demand to prove it or show me a note or tell me what your exemption is and the details of the exemption. Nobody has to show you evidence of their exemption. And that leads me to the final point of this. And I've had a lot of people email me and call me and ask me, "Well, I'm a private business owner. It's private property. Can't I make up my own rules because it's private?" And the answer to that is no. While the property and the business may be privately owned, it is licensed either under municipal or provincial regulations. It's licensed to conduct business under whatever business it is. When you conduct a business pursuant to license, whether it's municipal or provincial, for instance, even me, practicing law, I'm licensed by the Law Society through provincial legislation. When you provide service or goods under a license and you're open to the public, that's an invitation of any member of the public to come in and ask for buy your goods and services. Now, once you're licensed and your premises are an open invitation to the public, you are bound by all municipal laws and provincial laws that apply to your business, whether it's privately owned or not. So you are bound by the masking laws and their exceptions. You are bound by the Human Rights Code. So no, you can't just say it's my private property, get lost if you don't mask. That's a contravention of the law. And any contravention of the law can see you charged under the Provincial Offences Act and sued by your patron or employee. And so in fact, the Constitutional Rights Centre is developing templates for such lawsuits for those who have had their rights violated and those who choose to sue as self-represented plaintiffs. And so I hope that small business owners and business owners in general have found this YouTube presentation, this newsletter, useful. And thank you for listening. I hope it provides the information you've been requesting in your emails and calls. And this newsletter is for information and educational purposes only. It is not meant as specific advice on a specific fact situation. So thank you for listening, and please visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and make a financial contribution to the work of the Centre.